Thank you, Kenneth. Is this thing on? Yes. Hi, I'm Bruce. I'm newly, or relatively recently, the Deputy CTO of Opera, the Scandinavian browser. I'm the second best looking operative here today. You'll hear from Matthias later. He's the good looking one. And I'm an HTML-aholic. I first encountered the web in 1999 when I was head of primary at a school in Bangkok. And I got sick and I went to hospital and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I couldn't get much information about it because in equatorial countries this disease isn't found. So the doctors very helpfully photocopied some pages from a textbook with lots of encouraging photographs of autopsied brains in the pictures. But when I was back in my apartment and able to walk again, there was an internet cafe open just across the road. So I went in and typed multiple sclerosis into Alta Vista, which was kind of Google but powered by Steam. And up came this web page called Julie's Joint, which was set up by a woman in the UK who's subsequently become a friend. And it was full of people from all around the world, New Zealand, Canada, Norway, Denmark, France, the UK, all of whom were supporting each other through their new diagnosis of MS. And this meant the world to me because I didn't feel alone. I was part of a community that were connected by one thing from all around the world. And like Leave said this morning, that was the light bulb moment for me. I came back to the UK, I set up a book publishing company about open web standards, became a front-end dev lead, became developer evangelist at Opera, and then became recently the deputy CTO. But all through that time, I've kind of had a pledge to the web. Never going to give you up. Never going to let you down. Never going to run around and desert you. Never going to make you cry, never going to say goodbye, never going to tell a lie and hurt you. So all through... No audio. There was supposed to be the audio there, but you might have noticed there's a few AV problems today. So basically, I have spent the last 8, 10, 12 years trying to make the web better. Better for developers, because I was a web developer. Better for consumers, the people who actually consume the products and services that everybody in this room is engaged in making. Better for businesses, because for better or for worse, we all need to eat and pay our mortgages, so we need some business there. And of course, the web enables lots of businesses that couldn't exist before the web. Think of things like eBay. And my current primary interest is better for the next 4 billion people. Because at the moment, less than half the world is online. There are 7.4 billion people in the world. Only 1.1 billion are people like us with fast access. The people who aren't online, there's 1.6 billion in India, obviously India and China and Indonesia, because these are huge countries. But note as well that there are 51 million people who are not online in the US. This isn't only about emerging markets. Those stats are from the World Bank, by the way. And because we're all good capitalists here, I tend to ask people, where will your next customers come from? And the answer is they will almost certainly come from within this circle. If only because there are more human beings alive inside this circle than the rest of the world outside that circle. There are 4 billion people in Asia today. I was there 2 weeks ago, and it felt like all 4 billion were in my hotel, actually. But the UN predicts that by 2050, that will rise to 5 billion people in Asia. There are 1 billion people in Africa today. The UN predicts that will rise to 2 billion by 2050. And by 2100, which hopefully most of us will see, there will be 5 billion people in Africa. As a tangent, a lot of people imagine some kind of terrible Malthusian tragedy of overpopulation. But maps lie to us. The Mercator projection that you're used to seeing tells you fibs. Africa is really, really big. You can fit China, don't know what happened to that slide, China, the US, India, and all of Western Europe could fit into the landmass of Africa. By 2100, 50% of the world will live in just these 10 countries, only one of which we regard as Western now. So let's look at China. China is 1.3 billion people, GDP growth of 7.7%. These figures are from the CIA fact book. They issued me one. In China, e-commerce is huge. In 2014, Black Friday and Cyber Monday in the US saw $2.9 billion change hands. On 11/11 Day, that's the 11th of November in China, a big shopping day, $9.2 billion changed hands. They estimate that e-commerce in China will exceed $1 trillion by 2019. Indonesia, the most populated country in Southeast Asia, 250 million people, 5.8% GDP growth. I don't know what the Danish GDP growth was like last year. The UK was nothing like this. Indonesia, 75% of users are on 2G, and 50% of smartphone users report daily network problems. This is largely because of the geography of Indonesia, which is, of course, thousands of different islands. But that doesn't stop Indonesia being the most active nation on Facebook. Southeast Asia is predicted to grow to 480 million internet users by 2020. Indonesia is the fastest growing nation in the world. If you want some dollars there, the internet economy in Southeast Asia will reach 200 billion by 2025. That's 6.5 times what it is now. South Asia, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is not considered to be a particularly dynamic economy, but it grew by 7% last year. It was the first nation in South Asia to adopt cellular technology. By 2011, more than 50% of households had access to a mobile phone. Myanmar, Burma. The government, who are called SLORC, the State Law and Order Restoration Committee. Most words that begin with slur and nasty. But anyway, SLORC, God bless them, are attempting some democratization. That's resulted in 13.6% GDP growth. A SIM in Myanmar has recently gone down in price from $2,000 to $1.50, causing a huge internet surge. India, the most populated nation, of course, 1.2 billion, GDP growth of 6.9%. I was there 4 weeks ago having a snoop around. It's predicted that the number of internet users will double to 400 million, and the internet will contribute 200 billion to India's GDP, 5% of the total by 2020. What do all these nations have in common? There's many commonalities. One of them is that apart from China, because of its recently abandoned one-child per family policy, the populations of all these countries is young, and young people are, by definition, much more familiar and au fait with doing things on the web. They also consider themselves global citizens, particularly in Nigeria, China, Peru, and India. And the BBC did this survey, and they let me use this graph. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the nation that considers itself least to be a global citizen is Russia. And rather disappointingly, the UK is there at under 50%. Another thing they have in common is everybody's coming to the web on smartphones. There's a generation now of people in Southeast Asia and Africa for whom a computer means a smartphone. These people will never own a beige tower that sits on their desk like you probably have. Of 690 million internet users in China, 620 million use a mobile device as their primary device. But there's a more profound commonality between these countries as well. These are stats through the Opera Mini servers. I'll talk about Opera Mini a little bit later. At Opera, we can look at aggregated stats by territory. We cannot, even if we wanted to, look at what you as an individual do. I need to stress that. Last month in the USA, on the Opera Mini servers, these are the top 10 domains that people looked at. Search, stalking your childhood sweetheart, funny videos of kittens, uncensored information, blogging stuff, and of course, Apple. The top 10 handsets in the USA last month that were running Opera Mini are unsurprisingly high-end handsets. America's a rich country, or most of them are, or a few of them are. The top 10 domains in Indonesia last month are stalking your childhood sweetheart, search and blogging stuff, funny videos of kittens on skateboards, uncensored information on Wikipedia. But the top 10 handsets are very different. Lots of Android devices there and lower end things, generic WAP, a Nokia Asha. The top 10 domains in Nigeria last month are search, childhood sweetheart, uncensored information, funny videos, opera, get in. And Nigerians are obsessed by football, so goal.com. What this shows us, the top 10 handsets were lower end again. Lots of local, of Chinese imports, techno, lots of Windows phones, the cheap Asha range. What this shows us is that regardless of people's disposable income that they can pay for hardware, regardless of the network conditions or the geography, people want the same goods and services worldwide. And I think that's quite profound. And they might want the goods and services that you can provide them if you give them access to your sites. So something we're doing in browser land and web standards land, we're trying to make some supply-side improvements to make it easier for the 4 billion to access websites. This is a cake that the Opera developer team ate to celebrate our 2048th commit to the Blink project. When we switch most of our products to using Blink, we don't just skin it, we are the second or the third largest contributor to Blink after Google, and the other one is Samsung, and we kind of, month by month, we vie for second or third place. The Google guys, obviously, as you know, are very focused on 60 frames a second. We're very interested in performance too, but one of the things that we do in Opera, because we've been doing it for a decade and a half, is making code run well on lower spec devices, because that's where our primary market share is. Making things more memory efficient, making things more performant. And one of the things that I've been working on with colleagues and friends in Google, and I'm talking to Firefox guys next week about this, is progressive web apps. I'm not going to talk in great technical detail because Robert stole my thunder, or Patrick. One of the things we know about consumer behavior is consumers love apps, and they love them because they install to the home screen. So with progressive web apps, we need things that install to a home screen. A progressive web app can have its own icon. It's not a browser icon. They can launch full screen, portrait, or landscape because consumers love that. But crucially, excuse me, the app lives on the web, not on your device. And this is really important. Some research from Google last year, most app users have 36 apps on their phone. 1 in 4 are never used. But they take up space. And we know that lower spec devices, or cheaper devices that are the commonly used ones in emerging markets, come with little RAM and not much storage space. At Google I/O last year, they revealed that 1 in 4 new Android shipments come with only 512 meg of RAM. A not particularly scientific test we did in Opera when we were preparing our progressive web apps builds, we installed the native apps for those popular web properties, and that took up 460 megabytes of storage space on the device. The progressive web app equivalent cumulatively took up 1 megabyte. And that's really important. Facebook found when they were launching their Facebook Lite app, a typical 20 megabyte APK on an Indian network will take 30 minutes to download, if it downloads at all. With space this limited, the user's comparing your app with their personal stuff. I bet you if I stole your MacBook or your Windows machine, you'd be a bit pissed off and you'd call the police, but that's okay because I can run. But if I stole your phone, that would be cataclysmic because that's a really, really personal device for you. And that's no different in emerging markets. The World Bank surveyed people in Africa, And the primary uses for phones are, perhaps surprisingly for iPhone users there, phone calls. Yeah, people make phone calls on their phones. Text messages, missed calls. You might not know about this in Denmark. I didn't know about it until I was in India a few weeks ago. But a lot of advertising hoardings say, for more information, send a missed call to this number. You ring once, you put the phone down so it hasn't cost you anything, and they call you back. This is really, really common. Games, music, transferring airtime in many, many territories. Airtime can be transferred from number to number, and it's used in place of real money. So people don't have to walk around in potentially dangerous environments with lots of cash. When you buy something, you transfer that amount of airtime to somebody. But you can see that just like for everybody else, for African people, their devices are for personal stuff. Their music, their pictures, talking to their friends and family, their videos, their photos. And if you're asking people to give up, to choose between photographs of their children and their favorite songs or your e-commerce app, what are they going to choose? Birdly wrote a blog post called Why You Shouldn't Bother Making a Mobile App after they closed theirs down after a year. We didn't stand a chance as we're fighting with both our competitors and other apps for a few more megabytes of room inside people's phones. And this is why progressive web apps, the only thing that gets downloaded to your phone is a manifest. And the manifest is tiny. You link to the manifest from the head in your HTML. And thus browsers that don't understand progressive web apps ignore this because HTML is fault tolerant and your progressive web app is just another website. Nobody's locked out and nobody's left behind. If your browser does understand progressive web apps, this is a complete manifest. It's that small. It's text, it's JSON, and it gives the browser enough information to know how to put an icon on the screen, the name, and the kind of information it needs to open up the app. When the user starts it, they tickle it into life with their digit, just like a native app. Whoa. That video didn't show either. And it all works. You can opt to show it full screen, and then you don't get the Android status bar or the soft keys. You can opt to show it portrait or landscape. And making this manifest file is really simple. You probably have most of that information scattered around in horrible proprietary meta tags in your page anyway. So with a friend of mine, Stuart Langeridge, I wrote a manifest generator which will go through all your meta tags and try to write the JSON manifest for you, prompting you for any missing information that you can just copy and paste into a text file and load up to your server. Google have a manifest validator there. And if you want to see some progressive web apps in action, go to pwa.rocks, which is, we began it in Opera, but it's a community-curated thing. Many of the progressive web apps we're seeing are coming out of India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Kenya, and that is not a coincidence. As Robert said, you can enhance engagement in both Opera and Chrome for Android if the user shows engagement with a site, and currently that's 2 visits or 2 pages viewed within 5 minutes, and it's a good app, the browser will offer to save it to the home screen. This is rewarding good apps with this. You don't need to do anything as a developer, and you can choose not to do this if you want. I was lucky enough to go to Bangalore a few months ago for the launch of Flipkart Lite. Flipkart is a big e-commerce site in India. Think of it like Amazon for India. And they, about a year ago, they cancelled their mobile website and pointed everybody to the App Store or the Play Store. And 96% of people who'd taken the trouble to type in www.flipkart.co.in never downloaded the app. They only got 4% conversion. So they reversed their strategy and they made a progressive web app as their mobile site. They see 40% returning visitors week over week, 63% conversions from home screen visits, and 3 times the amount of time spent browsing online from their progressive web app every week. And the reason I made a progressive web app is, as their head of engineering said, we want Flipkart Lite available on every phone over every flaky network in India. To summarize, because you know all of this stuff, progressive web apps live on the server, so there's no update distribution lag. A lot of the times, if you update your app, the user might get notified, but he or she might be in a village and might not visit a coffee shop for free Wi-Fi for weeks or months. It may be the case that their data plan is so limited, they just don't want to download your revised app at all. In Nigeria, a lot of apps are never downloaded. People pay to have them installed on a memory stick, and they're never updated. There's no app store or gatekeeper. And crucially, a progressive web app is a normal website on a Windows phone, on Opera Mini, or Safari. They're searchable, indexable, and linkable, and they can work offline, which neatly segues me into going offline. You've all heard about this, but this is possibly the most exciting part of progressive web apps. One of the things that people loved about native apps is that they could work offline, and the web couldn't. But now they can, and I'm so excited by this development that I cracked open Photoshop. Other image manipulation tools are available, and I made a logo, which I'm giving free to the W3C, service worker. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have that? Is it possible to have the lights down a little bit? Look at the cat. Look into its eyes, look deeply into its eyes, and listen to my voice. Use Opera. Okay, wake up. Service worker, and if Jake Archibald were here, he would kick me for massively oversimplifying. But basically, at the moment, if the connection between your browser and the internet, which is a series of tubes, is broken, you just get a boring sorry message from your browser. But with Service Worker, it sits in between. And therefore, the first time the user goes online to your site, and they are online, you can elect to download any kind of assets you want. And then when the Service Worker detects you're offline subsequently, it can fetch assets from a special cache or an index DB and show you something. Now, the example I always give is, imagine you're writing a webmail client, because there aren't enough of those. And obviously, if you're not online, you can't send or receive messages. But you could still compose messages, draft messages, delete old ones, move things into folders when you're offline, and then they sync up in the background when you go back online. This is exactly what service workers are for. They also give you push notifications. As Robert said, do not destroy the ecosystem by sending millions of dull notifications, or the user will just turn them off and everybody loses. And it gives you background sync. Service Workers is an integral part of progressive web apps, but it has so many more uses for engaging people. And of course, in emerging markets, people can go offline for extended periods of time, and this will really help. Something else we're doing in browser land and standards land is responsive images. About 2011, I'd been to a series of conferences in the autumn or the fall, whatever you guys know it as, and every developer told me the big problem they had was with Retina images. You either serve huge, beautiful quality Retina images to everybody, and then older devices just have to compress them down and thus waste bandwidth and waste CPU cycles, or you send low-res images and they look crap on Retina, and there was no way to interrogate the device. So I, with a hangover, wrote a blog post and proposed a picture element. And my proposal was not very good, but fortunately there are cleverer people than me in Mozilla and Chrome and Opera and in the industry, and eventually, finally, 2 months ago, they made it into all 5 major browsers. These are picture, source set, the X descriptor, the W descriptor, sizes, etc. But the reason this is important is, as you know, the vast majority of web pages are images. The average web page last month was 2.3 megabytes. This is page, not site or app. This is web page. And of that 2.3 meg, nearly 1.5 meg was images. So if you can compress down images, if you can serve them smaller, you're making the web faster for people. I did a talk on responsive images a month ago in Bristol, and a member of the audience basically listened to the talk and liked it and put into practice the stuff I was talking about. His name is Mike Babb, and he wrote a really interesting blog post. But just by putting into practice a couple of responsive images techniques, he reduced his web pages down by 70%. And this is really vital, because it's not just about making the web faster for us, people in that 1.1 billion people who have access to high-speed internet, but a lot of people pay big money for their web access. Citizens of rich nations pay on average 1 to 2% of their monthly income to connect. In 51 countries that the Affordability report analysed, the price for entry-level mobile broadband hovers at 10% of monthly incomes. To put that into perspective with fewer words, an entry-level 500 megabyte monthly data plan in Germany requires you to work 1 hour at average wage. In Brazil, you work 34 hours for that. So if you're serving bloated images, you are not only making people wait, but you are making them work harder. And we're developers, we don't like hard work. But this is real people's real lives. Something else that inhibits web use in emerging markets are network problems. Yesterday, actually, I read a report from Ericsson, a new report that came out at the end of August. Yesterday, yeah. Cellular networks have improved, but smartphone users are still facing issues as frequently as they did in 2013. The issues are different. Now they are things like videos not downloading fast enough and continually buffering. But people's perceptions is that networks are still a problem. And many people in the world choose to deal with this by using proxy browsers. I'm going to talk about Opera Mini because A, they give me money, and I like paying my mortgage. Actually, I don't. I hate paying my mortgage, but I like having a house. And also because I know about this. Other proxy browsers are available, but Scienta Mobile have this pie chart of which browsers are mostly used in proxy browsers, and Opera Mini is 42% globally, it appears. Now, in Opera, we invented Opera Mini because of feature phones. Feature phones simply don't have the processing power or the storage to run a full operating system and a full browser. So a proxy browser does the heavy lifting on a server and sends down a compressed version. When the product manager of Opera Mini was clearing his desk, he found all these old devices, all of which still run Opera Mini. It runs on about 3,000 or 4,000 different devices that we know about, but we're constantly hearing from people for whom it works on theirs. And it works like this. It's a thin client on your device, and all the work is done by servers. This is Thor. He lives in Iceland, and he's cooled by He's cooled by glacial water, and he's powered in part by hydroelectricity in Iceland. And that's where all the work gets done. Thor, of course, has a hammer, and he hammers down the data. The best I've seen is 92% compression, but on average it's about 80 to 90%, obviously depending upon the site. That means that a page that would be 1 megabyte in another browser will be like 150K in Opera Mini, which means it downloads faster, it's got a better chance of getting through congested networks, and of course people get 10 times as many web pages for their comparatively expensive data plan. With ad blocking, which we launched in Opera Mini, with Opera Mini you get 40% faster browsing, 35% faster Facebook, and 14% more data saved. And that matters for 2 reasons. In India, independent tests, Opera Mini consumes on average 14% less battery and 89% less data when compared with other popular mobile browsers. And the battery is really important. A third of Indian citizens have no access to power. And regularly, across India, there's 9.8% shortfall in power production, and whole cities get power cuts for hours on end. So if your website is hosing people's battery, they won't be very happy with you. This power shortage has led to a whole kind of sub-ecosystem in India. A third of all smartphones now come bundled with power banks, so people can charge them when they have access to power and then carry it with them when they don't. That was less than 1% 2 years ago. This means, of course, is that sites are getting more and more, requiring more and more CPU cycles. Thus, Opera Mini is popular in emerging economies. We do 120,000 transactions a second. We compressed 23 petabytes last month. 23 petabytes is an unimaginably big number. At the Large Hadron Collider, they do 600 million particle collisions a second. They collect all the data, and that is 30 petabytes annually they collect. We did 23 petabytes last month. Therefore, 50 million users in India, 20 million in Indonesia, Nigeria, and Russia, 10 million in Bangladesh, China, etc. Exactly the kind of places that you'd imagine this to be big. It's huge. But interestingly, well, actually, this is probably really not interesting and very geeky, but the Opera Mini servers are nowhere near the people who actually use it. And that to me was counterintuitive, because I grew up clicking buttons saying, choose to download from the server nearer you. But there's a good reason for this. We have a server farm in China, because of China and the Great Firewall. We have a server farm in Amsterdam, which serves Europe and the ex-Soviet Union. Server farm in Iceland, which deals with Asia. East Coast and West Coast America, which deal with LATAM, America, and Africa. The reason this is nowhere near the target users is their networks are like this truck that I photographed in India last year, greatly, greatly overloaded. In India, there are 736,000 cell towers, but only 96,000 of them are 3G connected, and only a third of those have fiber optic connection. Sorry, only 35,000 of those have a reliable fiber optic connection to the backbone. So it means that those cell towers are really, really congested. So imagine that you are in South Africa, and you make a request for a website. One request gets sent to the server farm on East Coast states. Then our server makes the 60+ fetches that the average website has for images, CSS, ads, Flash, JavaScript, etc. And that's done across reliable, fast networks. The page is rendered on our servers and is compressed down and then sent as one single binary blob in one single TCP request down through the congested networks to the end user. And thus, because it's one single TCP request, it's much more likely to get to them. In the big floods in Chennai last year in India, a lot of our users told us that Mini was the only way that they could get online, and I believe that's because it's just one single request that has to get through. If you're interested in designing for these markets, there are some interesting UX things. Never do this. In Thailand, to write somebody's name in red is literally to wish them dead. The reason is that when somebody dies in Thailand, they tend not to be cremated for 100 days. So the body is put in a coffin and it's walled up in a temple wall, and so they know whose body it is. They write the name on the outside of the wall in red. Thus, if you did that to somebody in Thailand, you were wishing them dead. And I am not an MBA, but I don't believe that is a particularly good way to start a productive business relationship with somebody. Don't do this. Tens of millions of people in Indonesia have one name. This is my friend Putri. Her Twitter handle is only Putri. She does not have two names. And if you require people to lie or make up a name just to fill in your sign-up form, and remember, I'm not an MBA, you are likely to piss them off. That's business speak. There are tech constraints as well if you want to deal with proxy browsers. Everything happens on the server. So everything needs a user interaction. Everything needs a server round trip. JavaScript in Opera Mini runs for 5 seconds on page load, and then we stop it, because the goal is to get things to the punter fast. Thus, JavaScript-only APIs don't work. Treat JavaScript as an enhancement, not core. Design won't always be preserved. If you have CSS rounded corners or gradients, we do not render them. The reason for this is we can't rely upon the client to draw the radius properly. If we made it into a bitmap, then that would bloat the size of the page, which is precisely the opposite of what we want to do. Animations show only the first frame, because a continually looping animation consumes CPU cycles, and that consumes battery life. And battery life is vitally important to people in emerging markets. We don't do web fonts. Web fonts tend to be for aesthetic and branding reasons, and thus are not vital to the content. They can be huge to download as well. And also, on lots of really, really small screens that are perhaps monochrome, the system fonts are highly optimized for that particular screen and give a better reading experience. If you need icons, use SVG. This is what it's for. Use this amazing new technique called progressive enhancement. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's really, really vital. You've heard of Airbnb. It's a company that allows you to get $20 for allowing a stranger to ooze onto your sofa. Well, they launched a new app, and they were terribly excited about it. We've launched our first Holy Grail app. It looks exactly the same as the app it replaced, but initial page load is drastically quicker because we serve up real HTML instead of waiting for the client to download JavaScript before rendering. Who knew? It's amazing. But if you treat JavaScript as an enhancement on your good standardized HTML and your nice CSS, it's going to work everywhere. I wish this were a sci-fi movie, but I've made the poster anyway. Of course, smartphones are exploding, not literally because that would damage your trousers, but unsurprisingly, the US, India, and China are the biggest market for smartphones because they are the most populous countries. But smartphone shipments to the Middle East and Africa saw 83% year-on-year growth in 2014. Feature phones have been hit hard. And this gave me a bit of an existential crisis in my role in Opera, because Opera Mini was invented for feature phones, and if feature phones are dying, does that mean the product that 280 million people use is going to die? But actually, we've seen the opposite. This is 100 devices that I bet you've never heard of, but these are the first 100 devices, Android devices, that shipped in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal with the Opera Mini proxy browser pre-installed. So why does a smart device that can run Android and can run Chrome and can run full Opera need a proxy browser? And the answer is what I'm calling Bruce's law of smartness. It doesn't matter how smart your phone is if your network is dumb. Phones are getting faster, memory is getting cheaper, but infrastructure takes decades to improve. This is a shot outside my apartment window in Bangkok. This is what infrastructure looks like in emerging economies. And this will take decades to improve, and by the time it improves, millions of more people have come to the web, and it will still be grindingly slow. 91% of people live within range of a 2G network. 48% live within range of a 3G network, and that's why people choose to use proxy browsers. And there are many: Silk, Puffin, UC Web, QQ, etc. If you test an Opera Mini, please do, be aware that most of the modern products have different modes. We have a high mode, which uses a web view and is fully JavaScript compatible, but we get about 50% compression by doing things like transcoding bloated PNGs into WebP, for example. And we have extreme mode, where every bit of rendering is done on the server. We get about 90% compression. On iOS, the default is high mode. You have to change it to see how it's going to look to someone in India. Android defaults to extreme mode, except for Poland, US, Sweden, Norway, Russia, and Germany, where networks are fast. And Windows phones and feature phones only have extreme mode. So we're trying to sort out some of the impediments to people getting on the web from the supply side, but there are demand side problems too. One of them is that smartphone sales are flatlining. Depending upon who you believe, they either went down in Q1 or stayed static. Last quarter, they're relatively flat, only up 0.3% from the same quarter last year, and only up 3% from last quarter. One of the reasons for this could be this device. I was given this at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. It's dual SIM, it has an FM radio, it can connect to the internet, it has a rudimentary web browser, it's not Wi-Fi enabled, and this retails in Africa at $2.36. But they did tell me that if I buy 100,000, they'll do them half price. $2.36. For many people, even the price of a basic Android phone is still a lot of money. In Cambodia, where I went on holiday in January, the average wage, this is before paying money to live, the average wage is $80 a month. which is kind of the price of an entry-level decent Android smartphone. So $2.36 could be exactly the amount of affordable disposable income people have for a phone. But it's not just about affordability. Africa has the lowest per capita income, but GSMA survey undergone last year and this year said that only one of the 13 markets they surveyed said this was the most important barrier. And it's not just about networks. Network coverage was not perceived an issue in most countries, even in Africa. The impediment is lack of awareness or content. A lack of awareness or locally relevant content was the most important barrier to internet adoption in North Africa and the second biggest barrier in sub-Saharan Africa. A lack of digital skills was the biggest barrier to adoption in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's the same in Asia. A lack of awareness and locally relevant content was 72% of people who don't use the internet said they either didn't know what it was or they didn't see the point because there wasn't stuff. 50% of websites in the world are in English, but only 10% of people in the world read English. 2% of websites are in Arabic, and 0.1% are in Hindi. This is why one of the reasons why on Republic Day, Indian Republic Day this year, we launched Opera Mini in 14 different Indian languages, which covers 95% of the Indian population. But it's only so useful to have the UI in the local language if there isn't the content to access. And this isn't just in Africa. In high-income Poland and Slovakia, 1/5 of adults can't use a computer. 41% of American seniors don't use the internet at all, 53% don't have broadband access at home, and 23% don't use cell phones. It's an age divide as much as anything. My friend Paul Arnett said, "Me on tech support, what buttons are on your screen? My mum, a hot water bottle and a dentist's chair." This is a highly edited video that a friend of mine called Sophia Pervez made, and she works for Club Internet, and they do user research in rural Pakistan. This is a video of a young man. He has a feature phone. He's never used a smartphone, and they've said to him, go to Google and type in the name of your favorite actress. Oh, shit. How do I start this? Okay, let's start. AV, hooray. Doesn't matter. Basically, he spends 3 minutes clicking around, and he cannot work out how to go to Google and type in a name until he gives up after 3 minutes. I only show 30 seconds of the video, don't worry, but I'll tweet the link later. But it's absolutely astonishing. This guy's problem is that he was used to a feature phone with physical keys, and he didn't know how to call up a virtual keyboard, which sounds really insanely obvious to us, but if you've never encountered that, you simply can't use that device. Of course, not everybody has this problem. On the beach in Cambodia, oh, here it is now. You can feel his pain, can't you? This is 2 minutes and 54 seconds. Three minutes and 15 seconds, then he gives up. But not everybody has this problem. I think for him it was that he was expecting it to be like a feature phone. I met this young lad on a beach in Cambodia. I don't speak any Khmer, but within 1 minute of mimed instructions, he'd taken my smartphone and taken this selfie. And it always cheers me up, this photograph. In the words of the car parking payment machine outside my favorite Chinese restaurant in Birmingham, UK, change is possible. Not only, thank you. Not only is it possible, it's necessary. Developing countries are home to 94% of the global offline population. And even within developing countries, there is a huge digital divide between income levels, between young and old, between rural and urban, and between women and men. The day after I got to India in February, I opened up the Times of India, and I saw this stat. Rural internet users grew by a staggering 93% December 2014 to 2015. 93%, yay. That means after that 93% increase, rural internet users are 9% of the rural internet population. 91% of rural Indians, and that's the majority, have no access. That's compared with 53% of people in urban areas. The World Bank says making the internet universally accessible and affordable should be a global priority. Not everybody cites affordability, because those people are looking at mostly text-only content. In Nigeria, the data needed to watch 2 minutes of online video a day costs more than sending your child to school for a month. In many countries, even the hardware is taxed. These are places with up to 15 or 16% import taxes on computers and on mobile phones. People in these places are getting pissed off. There's an initiative called Fast Africa, and they had a week of action in which they had demonstrations and events all over cities in Africa. They want fair and transparent IT taxes. They want governments and donors to step up efforts. They want what they call 1 for 2, 1 gigabyte for 2% of income. They want governments to invest in public access solutions like, computers in schools or community centres, etc. And a top priority given to women getting online. The World Bank says online work can prove particularly beneficial for women, youth, older workers, and the disabled who prefer the flexibility of working from home or flexible working hours. In India, women are 62% less likely to use the internet than men. Many of the underlying reasons for this, affordability, skills, and content, are the same as for men, but they're felt more acutely by women. Of the rural Indians, 98% of internet users are men. But we know that the web empowers women in emerging economies. In emerging economies, such as Africa, women are 25% of the non-agricultural workforce. But on the big Elance website, which is a place where you can look for and take up remote work, women are 44% of the workforce. And overwhelmingly, the women who were surveyed said the most important advantage for them wasn't the extra money, it was the ability to work from home and work flexible hours, because of course women bear the brunt of childcare, looking after old or ill family members across the world still. Notably as well, sadly, the most important disadvantage for women was that payment isn't good enough, far more than for the men, which leads me to conclude that, like everywhere else, the pay gap between women and men remains intolerably large. But governments can help. This is in Malayalam, which is a language used in the state of Kerala in India, and this says Kudumbashri. And Kudumbashri was an initiative by the Keralan government. They outsourced all their IT work to cooperatives of women from poor backgrounds. 90% of the women who do the IT work now have never worked outside the home, and over 50% get $1 a day, which doesn't sound much, but as a supplemental income, that is significant. The World Bank also says access to the internet is critical, but not sufficient. The full benefits of the information and communication transformation will not be realized unless countries continue to improve their business climate, invest in people's education and health, and promote good governance. Because people don't know how to use computers, so they need to be educated. They need better taxation so that these things are not priced out of their reach, and they need less corruption and more transparency in the telecom industry. But this matters. The McKinsey Institute, which is a big consultancy that deals with huge Fortune 500 companies and governments, wrote an interesting report. They said an increase in internet maturity similar to the one experienced in mature countries over the last 5 years creates an increase in real GDP per capita of $500 on average during this period. By contrast, it took the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century 50 years to produce the same result. Not just for financial reasons, but access to the internet changes lives. Trust me, I know it did mine. Thank you.